Thank you to everyone for coming to tonight's Harmonist Connection talk by Sarah Buffington and David Miller of Old Economy Village. The Harmonist Connection is sponsored by Old Economy Village, Historic New Harmony, and Historic Harmony. These are the three sites of the Harmony Society. We host a few of these virtual talks every year and then post the recordings on our YouTube channel. And as I was saying a few minutes ago, if you check out the chat for this talk, you'll see the connection to the Harmonist Connection YouTube channel. And you can view recordings of our previous talks if you've not seen those before. And this talk that we're doing tonight will also be recorded and published on there, hopefully in the next week or so. So be sure to check out our other talks and, remember us for the future. So Sarah Buffington and David Miller both work for Old Economy Village. Sarah is the curator and David is the museum educator. Just a little bit of information about Old Economy. It's a National Historic Landmark in Pennsylvania. It tells the story of the Harmony Society after the group left New Harmony, Indiana, to establish a third settlement. Old Economy Village is administered by the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission, and it's actively supported by the Friends of Old Economy Village. And so thank you, Sarah and David, for sharing your knowledge about economy and the Harmony Society with us tonight. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to you. And Sarah, I've made you a co-host, so you should be able to share your screen.
Thank you. Okay. Just bear with us. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. So we titled our talk "Moving to Economy," and so I'm going to cover the reasons for moving. First of all, there's issues with proximity to transportation and to industry. Although Harmony was located on the Wabash River, if the river was low, they had trouble using it to get to the Ohio. And if they had to go over land, they had to travel 14 miles by road to get to Mount Vernon to get to the port on the Ohio River. Another reason they wanted to move was that they had established a wool factory there in Harmony, Indiana, but they had trouble finding enough wool. And so they kind of figured maybe by moving to Pennsylvania, they could remedy that situation and be able to get more wool. There were poor mail facilities and also poor communications in that part of Indiana at that time. Also, a major issue was the issue with their neighbors in Indiana. Their neighbors were, for the most part, frontiers people, and they kind of looked at the Harmony Society somewhat suspiciously because all the men voted in a block. They voted conservative in their political leanings, and that didn't go over well with some of their neighbors. The Harmonists all dressed the same, they kind of kept to themselves, and they were perceived as unsociable. Another issue was the language barrier. The Harmonists spoke the Swabian dialect of the German language, and that didn't go over real well with their neighbors living in Indiana. Pennsylvania was much more receptive to German-speaking people because Pennsylvania had many, many German immigrants living in the state. Also, health was a concern. The Wabash River flooded. They actually were in a flood zone. So that was an issue. And because they were in a low-lying area, malaria occurred. Harmonists caught malaria, and Harmonists even died of malaria. Kind of an unknown reason for why the Harmonists moved, that a lot of people aren't aware of, there was a biblical reason involved. In the book of Revelation, chapter 12, verse 14, it says, But the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place, where she is nourished for a time and times and half a time from the presence of the serpent. Now, George Rapp believed that the Harmony Society was the woman referred to in this verse. Often this woman is referred to as the Sun Woman. His followers leaving Germany represented the woman flying into the wilderness. George Rapp predicted that Christ was going to return in the year 1829. He interpreted the time referred to in the verse to be a period of 10 years. They lived in Harmony, Pennsylvania from 1804 to 1814, New Harmony, Indiana from 1814 to 1824, and they established a colony in 1824. So in 5 years, or half a time, it would be 1829, the year George Rapp predicted Christ's return. Looking for land. While in Philadelphia on business, Frederick Rapp learned about 600 acres of land for sale at Dead Man's Ripple, owned by James Blaine, located about 18 miles north of Pittsburgh on the Ohio River. Frederick Rapp, Peter Schreiber, and R.L. Baker left Harmony in February of 1824 to head to Pennsylvania. They had discussions with David Shields and Abijah Way, who are both business agents for the Harmony Society, about land around Sewickley and the Beaver Valley. They particularly were looking for land that had favorable water sources for drinking, water travel, possible landing for boats, not located in a floodplain, etc. They also were looking for land that had good timber available. Next slide. This is the home of David Shields. He lived in Edgeworth. His home was called Newington, and he was a very prominent person in that area. This house still stands today. So the initial 600 acres were purchased from the Blaine family. Schreiber and Baker stayed at Economy to prepare for the builders. Next slide. Okay, the area in red represents those 600 acres purchased from James and Robert Blaine on June the 10th, 1824, and they spent $20 per acre. Next. Now, the yellow portion, several different people were involved in the purchase of that. William Byron Sr. and his wife, and their son William Bryan Jr. and his wife Phoebe, sold the Harmonists 138 acres for $2,400 on June the 11th of 1824. James McCullough sold 720 acres to the Harmony Society on July the 17th for $5,000. William and Nancy Scott sold their 11 acres to the Society on October the 24th for $500. 350 acres from George McKee's estate was sold to the Harmonists on December the 1st of 1824 for $2,000. In orange, that represents the area that was purchased from the Bank of the United States, consisting of 409 acres, which included the former sites of Logstown and Legionville. And this purchase was on July the 9th of 1824. The green area was purchased from James and Winifred Musgraves. It consisted of 19 acres, and it was sold on the 1st of 1825. Also part of the green area had been owned by George McKee, who had sold them some of the real estate in the yellow portion. And then finally, the blue portion was sold by Captain William and Mary Vickery, consisting of 812 acres. It was located along the Big Sewickley Creek, and it was sold on July the 8th of 1825 for $13,000. So all this land would consist of about 3,000 acres total.
So then the first group would leave Harmony. A touching farewell took place under the escort of our friends, and with their blessed good wishes, we embarked on our boat. This is the Wabash River. There were 70 men and 20 women on that first trip to Economy. There were some farmers that also just walked their animals to Pennsylvania from Indiana. These people that went to Economy first tended to be the quarriers or stone cutters, the stonemasons, bricklayers, carpenters. They had one sawyer. They had laborers and teamsters or haulers, and of course farmers. The women, there were 20 women. They took care of the houses and meals for all of the workers, and they also helped to clear the land with door drap. They were raking together the downed twigs and everything like that and burning them. So this would be something that you all at New Harmony probably recognize. This is a chalk message written in German that was left under the stairs of Community House number 2 up in the top story, and it's still there. It's translated into English. It reads, "On the 24th of May, 1824, we have departed. Lord, with thy great help and goodness in body and soul, protect us. L. Shiel." That was 30-year-old Lawrence Shiel, and he was one of the first harmonists who left to build Economy. Here's a map of the Ohio River that was basically their journey. The Wabash River is cut off in this map a little bit where New Harmony is. So this is a map from 1810 from the Indiana Historical Society. So I've zoomed up on the different parts of the map so you can see. So in blue, you see the first trip. That's the first day's journey for the first steamboat of people that were going to Economy. So May 24th, 1824 is when they left. George Rapp left New Harmony with the first group on the steamboat Plowboy, captained by Captain Swagger. They left New Harmony at 4:00 p.m., went 48 miles, and by 10:00 p.m. entered the Ohio River. They didn't prepare sleeping quarters and slept sitting, standing, and wearing boots and shoes. Tuesday, May 25th, this is where they went. The yellow is where they went in the daytime, and then the orange is where they went in the nighttime. The Plowboy started at 2:00 a.m. that day, past Garris, Slim Island, Mount Vernon, Straight Island, Diamond Island, Hendersonville, which you can see Henderson on the map, Evansville, Green River is there on the map, 3 Mile Island, Cypress Creek, French Island, Little Hurricane Island, Yellow Bank, and then they saw the lights of Owensburg, and then they retired for sleep. They passed Rockport, Puppy Creek, and Anderson's River during the night. The next day is in green. They passed Rome, Evansport, Flint Island, Little Blue River, and then the darker green, they passed Leavenworth during the night. And then the next day was May 27th, Thursday. The Plowboy passed Blue River, you see that on the map, at 1 a.m. Brandenburg, took on 6 cords of wood at midnight. They have to keep those boilers going on the steamboat. Past Steamboat, Louisiana. They passed the Salt River, which is on the map. New Albany, shipping port, and they took on wood there. At 12 o'clock, they disembarked because of low water and walked 2 miles to Louisville. So you see that red part of the map. That's where they had to get out and walk for 2 miles to get to the other side of the Falls of the Ohio, which I'll cover later. The Plowboy plowed itself upward to the last ripple. Strongest men had to pull it by rope, and the boat arrived in Louisville at 5 p.m. So that took 5 hours for them to do that. They passed Jefferson and took on wood at midnight. Sounds like they did a lot of pulling with that load. So here in the blue is Friday, May 28th. They took on wood. They passed 6, 12, and 18 mile islands. And then the Plowboy passed Westport on the map, struck a lodged tree that was always a hazard for steamboats at that time. Carpenters helped repair the broken shaft and paddles by 7 a.m. They passed Bethlehem, the steamboat Lawrence, Madison, Indian Kentucky Stream, Small Kentucky River, the Big Kentucky River, which is on the map. Port Williams is on the map. Vevey, 9 Mile Island, Fredericksburg. And they took on wood at Sugar Creek. Steamboat Pittsburgh, they passed. And then they had a rainy day and heavier rain at night. They and their beds all got wet. So Saturday, May 29th, the yellow part, they passed Rising Sun, Aurora, Lawrenceburg is on the map, and so is Big Miami River. That's where they went into Ohio. They passed Cincinnati and Newport, both of those on the map. Steamboat Vulcan, the Steamboat Ostrike, the Little Miami River, which is on the map, and then it's nighttime. During the night, they passed New Richmond, Point Pleasant, Nevillesville, Moscow, and Mechanicsburg. The next day in green, they passed the Steamboat Pennsylvania. They passed Augusta, the town on the map. Lavinia, Ripley, Maysville, Limestone Creek is on the map, and Manchester Island, Salt Lick. And then during the night, they passed Twin Creek, Turkey Creek, the Scioto River, Portsmouth, Tigers Creek, Little Scioto River, and Pine Creek. The next day, this has taken 2 weeks for them to travel. May 31st, the Plowboy passed Little Sandy River, Stoner's Creek, Big Sandy River on the map, and then they entered what was then Virginia. It's now West Virginia. Steamboat Velocipede, Burlington, the Guyandotte River, Federal Creek, Meridian Creek, the Steamboat Mexico, Raccoon Island, Gallipoli, or I don't know, maybe it's called Gallipolis here, I don't know. But anyways, and then the night they passed the Big Kanawha River, Point Pleasant. Those are both on the map. And then Tuesday, June 1st, the Plowboy passed Big Sandy Creek, Little Falls, and then they had shallow water. So they're starting to get into problems. There was hardly 5 feet of water. Imagine trying to move a steamboat in 5 feet of water. And the bottom of the boat was scraping. During the night, they passed Shade River, Big Hooking River, Little Kanawha River, and it was gloomy, foggy, and rainy all day. Then the next day, they went just a short while. See the yellow on the map. June 2nd, the Plowboy got stuck from very shallow water in 4.5 feet near Marietta Island. They pulled loose by fastening a cable to a tree and crew running back and forth on deck to dislodge the boat. They're trying to rock the boat to get it free. They had to stop and gather wood to get to the next wood supply. They passed the Muskingum River, Marietta, those are both on the map, and Duval's Island, Wilson's Island, the Steamboat Scioto, I don't know how to pronounce that. And then it was a rainy day and night. The next day, they went a little bit further. It's June 3rd. The Plowboy passed Captain Island and Creek, where they had to rock the boat to get past a shallow area. They passed Briggs Island, Twin Island, Wheeling on the map. And then that was the rainy part of the day. Friday, you notice it's really a short place. They got stuck at Wheeling in shallow water. They unloaded the Plowboy, their ship, and loaded 2 keelboats with supplies until 4:30 p.m. When one keelboat left with 8 Harmonists, and 6 of them were men, the other keelboat was towed by the Plowboy. Steamboats General Pike and Congress passed them, and they stayed the night again at Wheeling. So they didn't get very far. June 5th, they left Wheeling at 4 a.m. and then the river rose visibly because it was raining all that time. They passed the Steamboat Mechanic. They overtook and passed Harmonists on the keelboat. They passed Pike's Island, Warrington, Charlestown on the map, Mingo Island, Steubenville on the map, Brown's Island, Black's Island, Big Yellow Creek, Baker's Island, Little Yellow Creek, and then they finally entered Pennsylvania. They passed Georgetown, there on the map, Line Island, Little Beaver Creek, and then during the night they passed the Big Beaver River, which we know is the Beaver River. They stopped 4 miles short of their new land because of dense fog. And then finally, They started at 6:30 a.m. and passed Crow's Island and reached the new land, which was Economy, at 7 o'clock or 7:30 a.m. There was a cannon discharged to signal their arrival, and at 8:30 a.m. they saw the white banner set out for them, and Peter Schreiber, with arms outstretched at harbor of the French Point, unloaded their boat quickly, and with 2 cannon shots, the plowboy left at 11 o'clock a.m. on its way to Pittsburgh. So their arrival at French Point. French Point was the part of the land that stuck out a little bit into the river. They landed, most of the group landed on June 6th at French Point near what they called Dead Man's Ripple. It was a little almost island in the river on the northern edge of future Ambridge. Schreiber was there waiting with outstretched arms and a white flag. Harmonist climbed 70-foot tall bank. That's a lot. They saw a large oak tree. The land was as level as the floor of a room, and yet with an imperceptible decline for water to run off. So Monday, June 7th, the day after they arrived, the first group of Harmonists walked around the boundaries of their new land, and at 12:45 p.m., they reached their tents and only reached half of their property. In the afternoon, they wanted to determine the place of the town. David Shields sent his son with 3 saddled horses for the Harmonist ladies to ride up, probably to that house in Swickley, as was proposed yesterday. George said, "I consider this place the most healthful in all America. All are satisfied, and the place and land please all extraordinarily. This afternoon, we will determine the location of the city so that when the keelboat arrives tomorrow with the tools, we may begin working away, that the bird again may have its house and the swallow its nest, as the psalm says." Your turn.
All right, the building of the town. So as Sarah said, there were 70 men and 20 women that first arrived, and they needed a place to live and stay. So simple huts were built for them to live in. However, George Rapp lived at the Blaine House, and the Blaine House at the time was located near the Big Sewickley Creek. George Rapp would make several trips each day into town to check on the progress of things. They decided to divide the men into 5 or 6 groups of people to work. And as Sarah mentioned earlier, the women, besides doing cooking and laundry, helped with the clearing of the land. A lot of land did need to be cleared. There's kind of an interesting term that comes up in some of the original sources back then. They referred to clearing the land as grubbing. And grubbing refers to removing trees, stumps, shrubs, and anything else to prepare the site for construction. The streets were laid out at right angles and were 60 feet across. They needed to obtain a lot of supplies for their town. On June the 15th, Abisha Way purchased a small raft of studding, joists, rafters, and 6,000 feet of boards. Shortly after that, an order was put in for including heavy rafts of timber, shingles, and a grindstone. Early in July, workers started the process of diverting springs into the town through wooden pipes into wells for their water supply. By July the 5th, 4 groups moved into 2 log houses. The first frame house was able to be occupied shortly after, although work still needed to be done on that first house, and a second frame house was expected to be done within a few days. John Baker went to Pittsburgh to see about more wood and shingles. There were delays in getting wood because of low water on the river. By August the 2nd, a barn was constructed to store grain. They were acquiring bricks for making the chimneys. By the middle of August, a storehouse was built. By the end of August, a store was built. And from time to time, the carpenters had to wait on the masons who were getting stones for the quarry. Next slide. By mid-September, George Rapp started his garden. George Rapp loved gardens, and I find it interesting that he starts on his garden before his really fancy brick house was built. By October the 10th, they had enough housing for a little over 100 people. By October 29th, the lumber was used up. Next slide. On November the 4th, they started their inn, later called the hotel. By mid-December, they were working on the roof of the inn, and then a shingle shortage came up. And by this time, ice on the river made it extremely difficult for the rafts to get to the site with supplies. By February the 9th of 1825, the economy was without lumber again and shingles until the river rose to a high enough level to bring those items in. Also by this time, the community house was under roof. Next slide. On March the 29th, they started road planning. They purposely built the town of Economy off of the main road. They did this to avoid local farmers from driving their cattle and hogs through the middle of the town. Next slide. By May the 25th, there were 33 framed buildings and 20 log buildings finished. The cotton and wool factories were also begun. Now this image shows the second wool mill. Their wool and cotton mill burned down during the time of Count Leon
1834.
in 1834. So this is showing the second building on the site, and that was exclusively a wool factory. Interestingly enough, along the lines of George Rapp working on his garden, by July the 5th, the Lady with the Harp carving was finished and ready to be shipped to Economy for the garden. And later this carving would be called Harmony. Next slide. The building on the right is the Blaine House. Eventually it was moved into town. This is where George Rapp was living at the very beginning. And this house then became the first school in the town. To the extreme left is the second school building that was built in the 1880s. And the building toward the rear was the first school built by the town of Ambridge. Okay, next slide. This is a photograph of our granary. Originally, there were 3 granaries built in the town. And the Harmonists were really kind of the original preppers. They believed that they were going to have to live through a 7-year period referred to in the Bible as a tribulation. During this period of time, the Bible talks about crop failure and famine occurring. And so the Harmonists had 3 of these granaries constructed, and all 3 were full of grain. So they were prepared in case of crop failure.
So there were a lot of difficulties that happened while they were building the town. And we know about these things because George Rapp was writing to Frederick about them, and he liked to complain about the problems. So we're going to talk about what some of those problems were. The weather and the local population caused problems with the harvest that summer of 1824. It rained too much in early summer to bring in the hay, which the Blaines had planted, and there weren't enough people to spare for harvesting due to town building. The wheat harvest was poor, and children and birds picked the apples before the Harmonists could get to them. And strangers drove their cattle across the Harmonist land in town, like David told you, annoying the builders and destroying their crops. They moved an old barn into town late in July so that they could keep an eye on their crop. While early summer was too wet, the rest of the year proved to be a drought. These conditions made river travel impossible. The Harmony Society could not receive any lumber purchased upstream, causing shortages in building materials. They turned to using logs to build what they called blockhouses. They built log houses in the rear of the corner lots, leaving space for brick houses because they had a lot of wood cleared from their property, but not enough bricks. The drought also kept more Harmonists from coming to Economy to help build and take care of the community members. At the beginning of September, 5 Harmonist men left Harmony, Indiana on foot with a wagon and 5 horses, taking a month to arrive at Economy. George Rapp often complained in correspondence to Frederick that he was not at Economy to help lay out the town and make architectural choices. Construction problems arose due to the lack of people. They just weren't getting enough people from New Harmony because the river was too low. There was 13,000 bricks that they received from the Blaine property when they purchased it. Those were needed to build chimneys, but they couldn't be used to finish houses. And the farmers had to carry all the lumber they received by river up the banks because the horses were all sick. That was 70 feet up the bank, remember. There weren't enough women to do all the washing, mending, knitting, and cooking for 70 men. The carpenters would have been able to build faster, but they had to wait for the masons who had to haul stones from the quarry, make foundation walls, wall the cellars, handle their own supplies, make lath, and build chimneys. The Harmony Society hired outsiders to bore their log pipes and lay them to bring water from the hillside springs into town because the region's sandy soil proved well drilling useless. George Rapp faced administrative problems with the outside world because he couldn't speak English and had to rely on others to communicate. Harmonist John L. Baker acted as his translator, secretary in Frederick Rapp's absence, and representative of the Harmony Society in Pittsburgh on business. George felt Baker wasn't firm with outsiders and let them do whatever they felt like for exorbitant wages. When Frederick sent large checks written in Baker's name, George became very angry. He confiscated all the checks made out to Baker and refused to cash them, saying he'd rather take out a loan or be done with business. He wanted Pittsburgh businessmen to know that he was in charge of the Harmony Society until Frederick Rapp resumed business at Economy. He didn't want Baker to be the one in charge, or so it seemed. Other members also posed problems. George Rapp felt that Ludwig Baumann was crude, troublesome, and a burden to everyone. He would never change. All through the fall, Baumann wildly demanded that his wife be allowed to travel from Indiana to Economy and threatened to leave otherwise. By mid-January, the whole congregation turned against him, telling him to leave with nothing but a small allowance for travel. No one, including his own son, wanted to live with him anymore because he was so offensive. However, Baumann would not depart until his wife and children came to Economy. He finally left the Harmony Society in June 1825, but came back a day later after he realized how much it cost to live outside of the Harmony Society. Another member, Jakob Klein, was another unbearable and argumentative member who protested everything and threatened to leave the congregation. George Rapp claimed that he spoiled other members and the rest of his family wasn't much better as they beat each other up. Klein left the Harmony Society in January 1825 at the insistence of Rapp. Lumber was still difficult to acquire in the first few months of 1825 because the rivers were still so low. This resulted in slow construction of necessary houses and buildings. The Harmony Society had ordered 26,000 feet of boards from a Pittsburgh sawmill. A tragedy ensued when the order was finally sent late the year before. The raft of lumber traveling down the Allegheny River met the Monongahela River and became surrounded by ice. Because it was cold at night, the men aboard built a fire on top of the dirt on the raft to keep warm. The ice in the river started to forcefully push the lumber forward on the raft, and the men vacated the raft without putting out the fire. The raft and about 9,000 feet of lumber caught fire. The rest of the wood was delivered to Economy, but weatherboarding and many other types of wood were missing. Although this affected building, the Harmonists kept progressing on the town. The society needed to sow oats in late March 1825, but the 4 horses that they had could not be used for lack of harnesses. The Harmonists were waiting for them to come from Indiana. There was no place to make new harnesses at Economy, and the saddle maker was busy with carpentry. In his letter from Economy dated September 9th, 1824, George Rapp wrote to Frederick in Indiana, "I assure you that this is quite a different kind of a world. Although there are some persons of evil inclinations, the number of better families outnumbers the former. We cannot complain in the least about our neighbors. Here we live in the forest, where thousands of hickory trees and oaks surround us and obstruct the view, and where our houses still stand invisible in the wilds."
All right. So George Rapp thought it would be a great idea for the Harmonists to have their own steamboat. And they could be using that for transporting Harmonists from Indiana and also some of their goods. So Stephen Phillips, a boat builder in Phillipsburg, now Monaca, signed the contract on June the 21st of 1824. Although the boat was built in Phillipsburg, the steam engine was being built in Pittsburgh, and their steamboat would need to be taken to Pittsburgh to receive the steam engine. The ropes and some of the textiles needed for the interior of the boat was made in Harmony, Indiana. The boat portion was finished and ready for launch on November the 27th. George Rapp, R.L. Baker, David Shields, and Captain William Vickery traveled to see the launch. There were about 400 people there. There were 60 men and boys on board. Some excitement occurred as the boat was sliding down the rails. One observer noted, "The boat moved, and amid a horrible cry, it suddenly declined a bit and quickly glided on the wooden rails so that it smoked and rushed across the entire stream. For the rope broke, and fortunately, about a rod from beyond the water, it turned around and was grounded. And if it had not been turned, it would have shot far out on the sand where there was no water. In this way, however, with a rope and many people, they could bring it over to the land. She flew with the velocity of a bird under the cheerful congratulations of the great numbers of spectators." End of quote. The people asked George Rapp, "What was the name of your boat?" Rapp asked the crowd, "Who was the first settler of Pennsylvania?" They replied, "William Penn." Then George Rapp declared, "The name of the boat will be called the William Penn." On December the 1st, 40 men were needed to tow the William Penn by hand with a cable to Pittsburgh. It got stuck at French Point because of low water. It took 11 hours to free it up. The boat passed Economy on December the 2nd and finally arrived in Pittsburgh on December the 5th. Mark Stackhouse and his nephew had built the engine. The engine was installed while some other finishing touches were being done to the boat. They had to wait for high water before the starting of the maiden voyage, which occurred on February the 15th. The boat's crew of 4 consisted of a captain, an engineer, a pilot mate, and a clerk. George Rapp didn't want any Harmonists as crew members, since he thought they would be quickly spoiled by worldly ways. The boat reached Louisville in 4 days, but could not go past the falls of the Ohio River due to low water. The William Penn was used for 4 voyages to move the Harmonists from Harmony to Economy. It had a reputation of being one of the fastest boats on the river. After a trip to New Orleans, the engine and some other things were in need of repair. Frederick Rapp decided to sell it, and the William Penn was sold in August for $15,000.
There's your boat.
There's the boat. Now we know that isn't the William Penn, but at least that is a steamboat of the 1820s era.
With mast. We're not used to seeing steamboats with masts. So by late 1824, the water began to rise again. So finally, they could start making a trip from Harmony, Indiana to Economy, but it was also winter. So it took 8 trips for the Harmonists to get all of them moved by boat. Some of them also walked by land again to drive their animals to Economy. So the first trip started December 26, 1824, on the steamboat General Pike. It took 12 Harmonist men to Cincinnati, where they were switched to the steamboat mechanic. They arrived at Economy on January 18th, surprising everyone there because they didn't know anyone was coming yet. And that made all the troubles and inconvenience of the trip worthwhile. So that was probably 3 weeks, I think, or 3 or 4 weeks to get to Economy. The second trip started on the steamboat Indiana. This was a really grueling one for Frederick Rapp. He went there with Conrad Feicht and with 33 women and 23 men. With freezing temperatures and low water levels, the captain of the steamboat Indiana was on the Ohio River. He was unfamiliar with the Wabash River. He stopped 2 miles up the river at Mount Vernon to wait for the Harmonists. After loading up the cargo, they set off, arriving at Shippingport, Kentucky, which is now part of western Louisville, 3 days later. So this is the Wabash River. This is a map of the Falls of the Ohio that this is how it looked in around 1800. So you can see Louisville or Louisville, however you want to say it, down at the southern end of the map. So the low water level and fear of ice caused them to have to unload and move everything overland above the Falls of the Ohio. In the Falls of the Ohio, it took a 26-foot drop over about a mile or 2 miles of river. This is the only drop in the entire length of the river. It was destroyed in the late 19th century when canals and dams were built to control the river. So if you go there today, it does not look like this. It took 20 drays, which are flatbed wagons like this one in the picture, and 3 wagons to move 2/3 of the cargo to the steamboat Congress. Frederick needed to store at least 15 tons of cargo in Louisville because it wouldn't all fit on the boat. During the move, food boxes collapsed, hoops on barrels fell off, bundles of tools fell apart, and things were getting lost. Frederick said that he regretted the decision to leave Harmony 100 times over, berating himself for being led by his senses instead of rational thought. With the river so low, they feared not being able to reach Economy. He was just wringing his hands about if he should make this trip or not. On the Congress, the second steamboat, the Harmonists had 22 beds, and the rest had to sleep on the floor. Without a room of his own, Frederick Rapp had to sleep among them on the floor. As the river rose and the weather became milder, the Harmonists reached Economy on January 22nd in 2 boatloads. Frederick and Conrad left Economy on horseback the next day to return to Indiana for a court date the first week of February. Their trip was tolerable, considering the season, but very tiring with a rough ride and 2 hours of sleep. More boats arrived at Economy with supplies from Harmony on January 29th. This was one of the rides that they said that may have helped to end Frederick's life early. So the third trip, this is an old picture of the Falls of the Ohio. You can see how choppy it is, and you can see some of the falls there. So they left on the steamboat Phoenix. They took it to the Falls of the Ohio. That was the plan, to go to the Falls of the Ohio and move everything to the William Penn, which was this was its maiden voyage. But the owners of the freight on the William Penn would not let it be removed to the Phoenix. and the William Penn was able to cross down the falls. The Harmonists prepared to rent a warehouse to keep their property and stay until a boat could be secured. Luckily, the steamboat Rego came along just in time. Although smaller than the Phoenix, it was able to take 60 tons of freight and the passengers. There was still a considerable amount of Harmonist freight warehoused in Louisville from a previous trip. The Rego reached Economy at midnight on March 18th. At 6 a.m. the next day, everyone at Economy went down to welcome the latest arrivals. They were excited. The fourth trip, they finally got to go on board the steamboat William Penn. 50 to 60 people made this voyage. March 18th, 1825 is when it began. The William Penn made its first appearance at Harmony on that day, creating a great sensation in town. The men rushed to see the boat, but the women stayed back. The freight was loaded, and the boat left with 50 to 60 Harmonists around noon the next day. The band played several pieces while the boat fired a salute. The William Penn reached shipping port the morning of March 21st. That's the lower side of the falls from Louisville. Not being able to pass the falls because of low water, the Harmonists negotiated with other captains to take their load to Economy. The Lafayette transported the passengers and 2/3 of the cargo from the William Penn, arriving at Economy at 2:30 a.m. on March 31st. The captain was insolent and tyrannical, demanding the boat be unloaded in the darkest night in the worst downpour. Meanwhile, the freight left in storage in Louisville was arriving at Economy very scattered and ruined, some having been left off in Wheeling. There's another picture of the Falls of the Ohio. The fifth trip, March 28th, 1825. About 130 Harmonists left on the William Penn with 150 tons of baggage and freight. They feared that the load was too heavy to cross the falls. This was going upriver, but the river rose enough that the boat crossed on March 31st. The people at Economy could hear the first shot at the boatyard at Beaver the morning of April 5th, and the second at Legionville. George Rapp knew it was the William Penn arriving, and all of the Harmonists were already standing on shore at French Point to greet the boat when it arrived. Later that day, the steamboat Highland Lady brought all of the beer that had been stored away in Wheeling. The sixth trip started April 1st, 1825 on the steamboat Plowboy. It departed Harmony with about 40 tons of freight and 25 to 30 passengers. Above the falls on April 3rd, the steamboat Belvedere took all the passengers and freight. On April 11th, the steamboat ran aground at Beaver River because it missed the southward turn on the Ohio River. They were able to load the things onto Stephen Stone's keelboat. This is Stone's Point, if you know about that, by Bridgewater. And they secured a wagon for some of the people. Everyone else walked to Economy. The Belvedere arrived at Economy empty, and George Rapp proclaimed the gentlemen on board were troublesome. The seventh trip was on board the William Penn. It left Harmony on April 14th, while the river level began to fall. The steamboat Velocipede took aboard 130 passengers and less than 1/3 of the freight above the falls. Along the way, the water level fell, and they had to load some of the freight onto 3 keelboats. The Velocipede landed at Economy on May 10th. These are all taken about 3 weeks. The last trip from Harmony, Indiana, May 5th, 1825. The remainder of the Harmonists, there were about 80 of them, assembled at George Rapp's house in Harmony, Indiana on May 5th. They were surrounded by Owenite families. The women sang farewell hymns, and the band played several tunes in front of the house. Mid-afternoon, everyone proceeded to the river, singing and playing music. At the end of the town, they stopped, turned around, and sang a farewell hymn and blessing to the settlement, and then continued to the boat. Robert Owen formally bade the Harmonists goodbye, and everyone shook hands. The Harmonists boarded the boat, a gun was fired, and the steamboat got underway in the evening. Both parties continued waving their handkerchiefs and hats while the band played a march. Yet again, the falls were not passable. On May 8th, the Harmonists spent all their time in Louisville, moving cargo in the steamboat Boulevard. Yet again, Yeah, the information we have for all of these trips is due to the fact that the Harmonists were writing to each other. And once they were all together, we don't have as much information about arrivals or building the town.
So for the town after building, I have decided to read an excerpt from May 1826 when Karl Barnard, the Duke of Saxe-Weimar-Eisenach, visited. And he wrote, after dinner, we visited the village, which is very regularly arranged. Go ahead, show the next slide. After dinner, we visited the village, which is very regularly arranged with broad rectangular streets, 2 parallel to the Ohio and 4 crossing them. On the 22nd of May, it will be but 2 years since the forest was first felled upon which economy is built. The roots still remaining in the streets are evidences of the short time that has elapsed. It is astonishing what united and regulated human effort has accomplished in so short a time. Many families still live in log houses, but some streets consist almost entirely of neat, well-built frame houses at proper distances from each other. Each house has a garden attached to it. The 4-story cotton and woolen factories are of brick. Mr. Rapp's dwelling house, not yet completed, and a newly begun warehouse are also of brick. The log houses stand in the rear of the line which the new houses are to occupy in the street, so that when in the time they wish to erect brick buildings, it may be done without inconveniencing the tenants of the log dwellings. Mr. Rapp's residence speaks rather freely against the equality he preaches to his people, yet without exciting jealousy or becoming a stumbling block. It consists of a principal building 2 stories high with 2 lower wings standing in the same line and is adorned with beautiful Philadelphia paper. At the back of the house is a piazza and balcony. There's also a garden containing several acres with flowers and vegetables, as well as vineyard situated on a terrace-shaped half circle on the hill, ending in a bower. I especially admired the beautiful tulips of the garden, in the midst of which is a round basin with a noble spring. Mr. Rapp intends to build a temple here, in which he will place a statue of Harmony. The statue is now ready. It is the work of a carver in Philadelphia and is a colossal wooden figure like the figurehead of a ship. In the garden are several cottages. One of them is roofed with sods and is used for a pastry house. On the top is a sort of seat where hereafter musicians are to sit. Within there is a temporary frame hall. Near the garden is the greenhouse. This house, as well as the garden, is under the inspection of a very pretty girl, Miss Hildegard, a relative of Mr. Rapp and possessed of much botanical knowledge. The women of this community have all preserved their Swabian costume, even to their straw hats, and they look very becomingly. After visiting, he visits the factories. He visits the cotton and woolen factories. And then he writes, after visiting these interesting factories, we went to Mr. Rapp's temporary dwelling, a good frame house, in order to take tea. Later, he writes, we examined the workshops of the black and locksmiths, which are under the same shed, and then the joiners and coopers. We especially observed the marks of actual. The warehouse is also shown to us where the articles made here for sale are used for the society. As every house has a garden, each family raises its own vegetables and some poultry, and each family also its own bake oven. Under Mr. Rapp's new house, we found a fine, roomy cellar in which he gave us a very good glass of old Rhenish wine and also some good wine made on the Wabash, of which he had 21 casks. As we passed along, we saw a small deer park in which the elder Rapp had amused himself with taming some bucks and does, which would eat out of his hand. We also saw here a noble young moose deer. He's actually referring to the elk, which was as large as a stout ox. He is also very tame, but during the season is dangerous.
Okay. Not going. Okay. So that concludes our talk about building the town, and we wanted to tell you about some of the bicentennial events that are coming up. June 6th is the 200th anniversary of the arrival of the Harmony Society at Economy. So that's going to be on a Thursday, but we're picking the closest weekend to that to have our bicentennial weekend. I'm jumping ahead. I'm sorry. Let me go back. April 10th. There's going to be a lecture. We're having a lecture series. They're, what are we calling them?
Lecture series.
Lecture series. Legacy lectures. 6:00 p.m. Eastern Time, Marketing the Presidency, which is 125 years of presidential artifacts by Steve Mahaly. And then May 3rd, there's a spring homeschool day, 10 to 4 Eastern Time. And then that's the weekend I was telling you about. The Bicentennial weekend is 10 to 4 on June 8th and 9th. It's the weekend. And that is all sorts of things happening all over Ambridge. So we're having, at our site, we're having music and all sorts of demonstrations and things like that. We're setting up a tent, kind of like the Harmonist did under the oak tree when they landed. We're setting that up on our site. And then outside of our gates, there's all sorts of things happening with a little hop on, hop off trolley tour of Ambridge. There's block parties happening. There's things going on in the historic district, including writing down the names of the people that lived in the houses in the historic district, the Harmonist houses. They'll be written on the sidewalks if I can get that figured out. And there's all sorts of other stuff going on. And we're having the Golden Rose play, which is a play about the Harmony Society. And most of the performances are going to happen at the Iron Horse Theater in Ambridge. And that's going to cover basically the schism of the Harmony Society. So it's going to be all acted out. Is there anything else I'm forgetting, David?
I think you got it.
Great, thank you. So we'll take any questions that you might have.
Well, David and Sarah, this is Barbara. Is there anything special going on to the church? Because I didn't even see any pictures of the church, but you know that until last fall when I moved to South Carolina. By the way, I'm not in Ambridge, I'm in South Carolina. I lived in the parsonage of the Harmonist Church, and that is the original church, and some of the pews are the original pews there. So I wondered what might be happening at the church during the bicentennial.
Yeah, the church is also planning to have something. I'm just not quite sure what that is at the time, right now, but they are definitely planning on having some bicentennial activities as well.
Okay, and I hope everybody read the chat. If not, I want you to know that it's a good thing I was muted because I burst out when I first heard David Shields' name. Oh my goodness, because this is the very first time. I mean, I've been at Old Economy for the last 13 years plus, and it's the first time I've heard of the connection between the Shields family. Now that's still as a matter of fact, there still is a David Shields, and my church is leased from the Shields family, and we meet. The rector and the vestry meet twice a year with the Shields family. I'm absolutely astounded by that.
And they were very close.
Yes. Oh my goodness. It's amazing.
Any other questions from anyone or any comments?
Did Robert Owen have like a deadline for the Harmonists to move out of New Harmony, or?
They kept on meeting back and forth. So the Owens and the Owen party came to Economy to talk about the deal, and then they also met in Harmony, Indiana, to talk about the whole deal. And the Harmonists still had stuff at New Harmony, and they were putting their stuff behind a wall, like, don't touch this. So they still had stuff, but as far as I know, they did not have a deadline. But it was probably all in their contract, their agreement for buying the land.
I wish we could have a reunion of the Old Economy Village singers
Oh, yes. that would be nice.
orchestra for the Bicentennial. It would be fun to sing some of those songs we sang a number of years ago.
Yeah, definitely. We are planning a church service. I think it's going to be 2 days, two performances on Saturday and one on Sunday, I believe, at the church, St. John's Lutheran Church, which was the Harmonist church. And so they're going to be giving some of George Rapp's sermons during that time and singing some songs. So what times they are right now, I don't know that, but it's all going to come out.
I didn't have any idea that it took them so long to all get here. Somehow or other, I thought they all arrived on the first couple, well, it's in the first maybe couple of months at the latest, but the fact that they were still coming and bringing materials in, I think it was 2 years later, 3 years later, that astounded me. First time I really don't know a lot of the history. I never had heard this kind of presentation, so I really enjoyed this, and I thank you very much for your efforts.
Yeah, before I read about all of this that we just presented, I thought that the Harmonists cut down the logs here and cut them in a sawmill and built their own houses and out of all of the lumber that was here, that they got all the land all at once, you know, and that it was just pretty much hunky-dory. But you know what, something that I found out while I was doing all this research, and this isn't just for this presentation, we're having an exhibit, and we're publishing a Bicentennial book, and there's going to be an article in the Pennsylvania Heritage Magazine all about the Bicentennial and building the town and all of that. But anyways, what was I going for? So I thought that that's how it was, and I was just amazed. I lost my train of thought.
I thought the same thing. I mean, I just kind of figured since this part of Pennsylvania still had a lot of old growth timber, that they're cutting the trees down and setting up a sawmill. Because later on, the Harmonists would have a sawmill, and I just kind of thought they did that early on. So found it very interesting that they had to get supplies elsewhere, and then the troubles of like low water, you know, being able to bring the supplies here.
Who knew there was a drought? And then the other thing I remembered now is I was recording as many people as I could find out who were in that first party of people that built the town. I've got, I think, 18 of the women figured out, and it's really hard to do the men because there's 70 of them. But most of those men that were here building the town actually left during the schism. I think it was a really hard time. George Rapp, I think, was really riding them hard, trying to get that town built, and he was upset. He wasn't living in town with the rest of them. He was living what's now around First Street in Ambridge. He was living that far away and had to drive into town 3 times a day. So he would come in the morning, go back for lunch, and then come back and oversee everything, and then go back. That would be 2 times a day. But anyways, he was hard to deal with, and he actually told Frederick to burn his letters. He did not want anyone to know about it. And of course, Frederick didn't burn them because that's where we learned everything. But the thing is, we don't have Frederick's letters. So, you know, George Rapp got rid of them. So it's very interesting, just all the little nuances that you see just by reading about all of this. Any other questions? I hope this was interesting for all of you. And thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I don't have any questions. I just wanted to thank you, Sarah, for doing this, and to Heidi for organizing it. It was very very interesting. Yes, I had no idea how long
Yeah.
it took them to get from there here to there and from there to here. And yeah.
And imagine that being done for Harmony and New Harmony.
Yeah.
You know, it's probably very similar.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure. But anyway, thank you for doing this. Appreciate it. Learned a lot.
Good.
I would also add that, we kind of have some ideas for future programs, but if anybody here has a topic that you'd like to see us try to cover and find an expert to talk about, just send Sarah an email, send me an email. We'll take that into consideration and see if we can make that happen.
Definitely.
But have a good evening. This recording will be going out either this week or next week, as soon as I can edit it and upload it to YouTube. So just keep on the eye out for that and the announcement on social media. But have a good evening.
Great. Thank you so much.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.